Welcome to another episode of Overcome Out Loud with Charlie Smith. This podcast is dedicated and committed to sharing the stories of real people that have overcome real obstacles and challenges in their lives to give you hope. Far too many people suffer in silence, and by overcoming out loud, the vulnerable and courageous guests on this podcast are sharing their story with you to provide an opportunity for you to feel hopeful about whatever's going on in your life. And we're back for part two with an incredible man, motivational and inspirational speaker, the author of the incredible book Sheer Madness, former federal prosecutor, and really just a really inspiring person, Andrew McKenna. Andrew, welcome back for part two.
Thank you, Charlie. Great to be with you.
After the last episode, I think I text you. I feel like I'd known you for so long, just given our kind of roots back there on the East Coast and just how kindred spirits we are in terms of our, fall from grace in our respective lives and this kind of bond we share of overcoming. It's meant so much for me personally to have you on, and the courage and vulnerability I spoke of is evident in you. So thanks. And thanks for making time for really kind of, like I said, the really important part of your story, which is how you started to dig yourself out emotionally, physically, and mentally from the places you were. So thanks for making time for us, man.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I agree with that. I feel like I've known you for a long, long time, and I hardly ever get that in life, but yeah, our mutual friend connected us, and we knew right off the bat. We started laughing about something. I can't remember what it was.
I know. So it's great.
Connection.
I'm man. Great. Thanks. So in the story of Andrew McKenna, we'd gotten to the point where you'd finally, I think you're at your friends and he had seen you on TV, and the walls were coming down. I think one of the things that I think as we reflect back that people will, and not everybody will understand, I clearly understand and many do, but some people don't understand what I'll call the addictive cycle. And it's not just the addictive cycle of drugs, but it's this moral compass that gets shattered. It's this feeling of loss and desperation, having grown up, with both parents, in the education space, and having been trained in the military, and having a lot of discipline and understanding a lot of principles and values that you were taught growing up, that as you get into this addictive cycle and now you're actually robbing banks. I think that part of the story where you just drive past the off-ramp to the child services case is so ominous for me. It sat very ominous on, very heavy on me, as life just closes in. And it's not just the addictive cycle of using drugs, but it's all of those things combined seem to be this vortex of hopelessness. And you had said you didn't have any massive plans or heard of any ideas about this idea of robbing banks, but it was just kind of emotionally how empty you were, that you were seeking just these kind of behaviors that went totally against the grain of who you really are as a person. As I've gotten to know you and know what you do, can you just share the emptiness of that feeling and how that addictive cycle just kind of leaves you, what I could only describe as empty and hopeless, and then that period of finding solace in or escape in the activities you were engaged in, I think is important to talk about.
Sure. It's really hard to explain to people how, I went from where I was to actually committing these crimes. It's hard to explain how things slip away. That you talk about the moral compass and how your tank is so empty and so void of any feeling that I think subconsciously I wanted to feel something. I wanted to feel some semblance of control in my life. And here I was navigating different systems, the court system, family court, the relationships with my two young boys, dealing with my ex-wife and her attorney, and blaming everybody else. So the only emotion I was really feeling was anger. And of course, anger is the secondary emotion to fear. And the fear was that my life was over, that I wouldn't be able to ever see my children again, that they would blame themselves. And so it's this it's a feeling of emptiness, but it's so profoundly heavy that a person doesn't want to get out of bed in the morning. A person doesn't want to take a shower, and a person doesn't want to get dressed in clean clothes and go to work or do anything productive. It's barely holding a new relationship together at the time, and not because of anything she did, but because of what I was going through. And I kept most of it quiet and most of it secret. So that day that I really fell and went to that first bank, it gave me a sense of calm when I walked into the bank. And you'd think a normal person, whatever normal is, would be nervous. But I wasn't, Charlie. It was almost like this sense of calm and control came over me. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, and an important feeling for people to understand is, and I think, by the way, I think a lot of people have experienced times in their lives where they have this illusion of control, and it creates these emotions that they have. So, we think if we act a certain way, behave a certain way, that we can generate these responses out of other people. And so we get frustrated, naturally when we don't. And when we're in this addictive cycle, we truly have lost control. We've lost control of so many things that the smallest little sliver of control, even in a kind of morally bankrupt move like robbing a bank, gave you that semblance of control, and you sought it again. So it gave you something, that peace and calm came over you, and we want that again. We want to feel a little control. And so even if it's in a very, and I go through, stealing prescription drugs from my neighbor's medicine cabinet, something that, if people from the outside world would look at me and coaching my kids in Little League, they would have never guessed that I would do such a thing. But the routine I had of going in, of turning the faucet on, of opening the medicine cabinet, of, it was that same, much different way, although totally bankrupt from a moral standpoint, totally against any principles I'd grown up with. Here I was, manipulating, my invitation over to a neighbor's house to take something that was theirs and they probably needed to benefit myself, but again, I so relate to that peace, that calm, that I guess a little bit of the thrill of the chase, the thrill of the hunt, but feeling like I'm in control of something, at least right now. I know I'm going to get these things. They're going to end up in my pocket and in my mouth. And I'm going to do that again.
Right. And you think about that, because that's not the real Charlie. That's not the real Andrew. And that's not the real, thousands of people that do things inconsistent with their value system, like we talked about earlier. We had reached a point where it was almost like, when we talk about the law and we talk about the intent to commit a crime, as a prosecutor, you have to prove intent as one of the elements of any criminal charge. I don't feel I'm totally responsible. There's no question about that. I accept responsibility. But I didn't form the intent to walk into those banks and do what I did. Now, you're never going to convince a judge of that, or a district attorney, or an assistant U.S. attorney, and I shouldn't. But that is a piece that I think, if our criminal justice system really embraced, again, I'm not asking to say, well, you should let somebody off easy because they were high, or they were severely depressed, or had borderline personality disorder, but I think we have to bring that into consideration. The people I was in prison with, and I read a lot about this in the second book that I'm finishing right now, were absolutely, the vast majority had mental illness, whether it was depression and anxiety, which is typically normal in a prison setting. But if you want to start talking about traumatic childhoods, or traumatic incidents when they were growing up, PTSD, those types of things, I would put it at close to 65 or 70%. And I have a good friend who's a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Keith Dablow, and he's a brilliant man, and he's written many books about this. But that's the number. And if you think about that's where we're taking, people with significant mental illnesses, and warehousing them in prison. And I'm not going to, get on my grandstand here and talk about that exclusively, but that is a factor. You weren't Charlie when you were walking into your neighbor's, and setting up the visit. Oh, hey, I'll stop by and go through the medicine cabinets. By the way, another thing you and I have in common. I used to do that too. But it's, that's not the real us. We're bankrupt. Our tank is empty at that point.
Yeah, and that's I think how and I think that's one of the underlying issues that everybody that faces an obstacle or a challenge or an empty state in their life faces, is that the way out seem, at least for me, it's like I don't even know where to fucking take the first step. And I am so low, I'm so lost, I'm so fractured from the man I wanted to be, that I thought I would be. I just keep wrapping myself up in that warm blanket of shame and guilt, and then try to avoid those feelings with another fix of something. And I think it's one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing here and overcoming out loud, because no matter how far down the scale you go, that as soon as you stop and reach your hand out or find a way to start getting help, you can turn things around eventually, with some consistent practices. But it does feel hopeless. It does feel empty, and you were continuing to chase that control. And I guess, as you got sentenced, how long was the sentence that you drew?
It was 65 months. So, 5.5 years. But I want to go back just for a second, if it's okay,
Please.
Charlie.
Yeah, of course.
Said something, maybe you said something that really caught my attention. You were saying, you felt like you weren't the man that you were supposed to be, or you wanted to be. Did you ever feel, because I always felt this too, I also wasn't the man that I knew other people thought I was. Does that make sense?
Oh,
Like, because we had this, people around us would say, oh, Andrew, he's good at this or he's good at that. And, what a good guy, or something like that. And I'm sure you probably got a lot of, Charlie, super bright guy, fun to be around, all these other things. And so in addition to all those feelings of, I've lost my life, I've lost my career, my children, and all these stuff. But I also was very aware that the people that around me, I was letting them down on one level for sure. But I was also sort of bursting the bubble that they had in their minds about who I was. And
very
that
much
was also devastating.
Yeah, very much. It's I mean, I think if you were to look at the psychological statistics on the number of people that have faced or dealt with imposter syndrome, it's significant. There's a lot of people that don't feel worthy of the reputation they have or the position they have. But when you're actually an imposter, when you actually, kind of are internally and externally putting out a stage character, but in your heart, at least for me and my soul, I didn't deserve the reputation that I was hearing from people, because I knew how I felt about myself. Yeah, it's highly disappointing. It's highly disempowering, and it creates another level of shame and guilt, because oh, look, he coaches them and he does this and he does this and he's building this, and deep down inside, I would hear these things, but I knew I didn't deserve it, and I didn't have any real trust in myself. And so, I wanted to run. I think that's part of why I would isolate and kind of withdraw from society so much, is because it was just hard to look people in the eye for me. It was just hard, to hear those things. Whereas today, sure, I think both of us are much more in, I would call, alignment or congruent. Yeah. And it's a little easier to look the world in the eye. So the answer to your question, Andrew, is absolutely. I mean, that imposter syndrome, that double life, that hearing or wanting a reputation, but knowing inside I didn't deserve it. It just made for more of the same. Let me just pile on more shame and guilt. Let me just find more escape, more ways to numb.
Right.
and more unhealthy ways to find control.
Right. I want to throw this in quickly, but I know we have to move on. So two quick things. One, we had a family event. I won't get into the details because it'll kind of give away who was present, but there's a couple people in the family who I don't spend a lot of time with. They're kind of distant in a sense, but I got the sense from two of them that they thought that I was full of shit currently today as we're speaking. And you know, you and I've dedicated ourselves to trying to help people find a way out and a way through, you know, addiction and mental health and stuff like that. And it's from our hearts. And we know that. It's different from where we were back then when we were going through that hell. But to get that impression and almost like the sarcasm, like, oh, no, not you, Hensher, you wouldn't be chauvinistic or fake or something like that. It was a different kind of like ping in my stomach. I don't know if that makes sense, because I felt like saying, no, this is the real me. But then I thought, who do I have to convince that this is the real me? You know, my wife's an open book, you know. So it was interesting because back then, if you got that look, then you deserved it and you felt it and you internalized it. But now it's kind of like, no, you have it wrong. You know, I've surrendered. You know, I'm vulnerable, and if you're not, that's okay. You don't have to be, but you know, don't judge me because I happen to be. And you know, it's an interesting dynamic for
It is.
sure.
I'll say it this way. Yeah, I'll say it a couple of ways because I think both are important. And by the way, a lot of people in this world, I think there's, you know, I would have I think at one point in my life, a PhD in FOPO, you know, fear of other people's opinions. And here's the deal. You're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to my fucking opinion. You know, you're entitled to your opinion about me, but you're not entitled to my opinion about me. And the opinion I have of me is the one that matters the most. And I think before, what other people thought of me impacted me so much because it's what I thought about me. They would say things that I knew actually were true, or they would say things about me that I actually knew weren't true. And so I was always caught up in this conflict because there was no real me. And I think today, when there's one Andrew, when there's one Charlie, you know, I have to recognize that people are going to look at me through whatever lens they have on. And there's a pair of glasses and a lot of people who say, leopards don't change their spots, man. You were that before. You were a cheat, a lie, a thief before, and all this stuff coming out of your mouth is just words. And I can't do anything about that except not react to it or respond to it and realize that it's not true and I get to be who I am. And I've certain immunity. I have empathy for it. I understand why somebody could think that because I was full of shit for so many years. And it's like, well, how do what did you turn on the not full of shit switch? And it's like, you know, I've worked really hard to try not to be full of shit, but I can see why you may think I still am. And like I said, you're definitely entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to my opinion of me. And that's the one that I've got to work on.
I just wrote that down. I love that. And yeah, I have to work on that too. Not as much as I had to yesterday, and it'll be even less tomorrow, but you're absolutely right. And that's a big piece of this. And you could do a whole show on this separately. But that whole, you know, when you come back and you're humble and, you know, you feel contrition and you show contrition and you express it, you know, what's the dynamic of when you're coming back and who receives you back and how those things go, because
Yeah.
that's a big piece, you know. And I know here I'm excited to talk about what I went through uh, when I knew I had to do something and how it hit me, because it was heavy for me. And I know we want to get into
Yeah, so
that.
that's you know, and I have a feeling this isn't the last conversation you and I will have with the world about overcoming, and for this particular episode, yeah, we're going to find out what's it like. I mean, I can't imagine, and I guess you're going to try and share with us what it's like to hear those cell doors slam on a 65-month sentence when you've had all your freedoms. You know, as And your life got small. Let's not confuse these two. I mean, your life was small. You were in your own internal prison in terms of the way you were living, but now there's got to be a certain sense of real doom and gloom when you hear that those metal doors shut and you're going to prison.
There's nothing like it. And
Wow.
dude, it is so crazy to hear it clang behind you, and then the doors in front of you open, and then you step through another set of doors, and then the doors clang behind you, and then you get to your cell, you go in, and then the doors clang, and I can hear it right now as we're speaking. It's intense, and the adjustment period for me was not fast. I had everything to learn. Like, I didn't know any of the rules for jail initially after my arrest. And I finally got bail after 6 months. It's unbelievable. But I literally had to put together, you know, I was able to reach out, and my girlfriend at the time did a ton of the legwork, set up an appointment with a psychologist, have her come to the jail and do an evaluation, write a letter to the judge. Am I safe to myself and to the community? You know, set up an appointment with an intensive outpatient so I could attend. Contact the ankle bracelet company that monitors you when you're on home confinement. All these things. Third try, fourth try, maybe we brought it to the judge. My attorney was so sick and tired of me, Charlie. Gene from home, wonderful, wonderful. He said, Andrew, can we just stop trying to get bail? And I said, no, we're not going to stop trying, Gene. Please, please. And then I tried it one day. I tried to get him. I said, well, could you bring me some cigarettes next time? And he almost punched me. And he's this big, strong Italian guy. And he said, I don't know why I brought up his ethnicity right now, but he's just, you got to picture him. I'm trying to paint the picture. And he and I are dear friends now. But he said, you're trying to make it so I'll be in the cell next to you if I'm smuggling in contraband and cigarettes to you. And I said, like, yeah, you're right. I said, just focus on the bail. Okay, just focus on that. So anyways, we brought this package to the judge, and the judge said, okay. And it was Judge Randolph Therese in the Northern District of New York, District Court, Federal Court. And he made it so clear, Charlie. He said, if you mess up once, you're back in and you'll never see the light of day. And he meant it. And rarely do you see the federal judges. Usually they're very, very stoic and professional, but he almost came across the bench when he told me that in court. And so I had a year out almost on, home confinement. I did an intensive outpatient program, focused with my psychologist on the mental health pieces, and started to peel back the layers of the onion. Now, I had struggles during that time that I was out. I was clean, but I wasn't sober. And I don't know, I had made progress, but it certainly wasn't, sobriety.
Can you just can you draw that distinction? I mean, some people may not understand what you mean when you say I was clean, but I wasn't sober. I mean, we paint a lot of lines on the road sometimes with our narratives. Can you explain when you say I was clean but not sober? Does that mean you were still engaging in some behaviors that weren't consistent with what you said you really wanted to be?
Right. So you can be clean, you can not use, which I didn't use. I didn't use opioids or any drugs at all, except for alcohol, which of course is, a drug. And, but really the distinction is if I didn't drink or, didn't use drugs that whole time, I'm abstinent. Okay. But I'm not really practicing any principles that would really get me healthy. Fortunately, and I didn't drink the entire time I was on bail. It was sporadic here and there. I'd have a few beers, but still, be true to thyself. So it wasn't, a picture of sobriety. but I really did get into treatment heavily, and it helped me. And I went to a place in upstate New York, and I had great therapists. We had great groups. Some of the people in the groups were mandated by the court system to be there. Uh, in fact, I actually, now that I think about it, of course I was as well. That was one of the conditions of my bail. But during that period, I really realized where I had been and why I did what I did. It started to I started getting an understanding of that, and I will never forget it. My lead therapist in group cut me off while I was rambling. And she said, "This had nothing to do with getting money for heroin. That's not why you committed robberies." She said, "You were angry." And I stopped and I looked at her and I started, like, I'm Irish, so I cry a lot. And so these tears just started coming down my face. And I said, um, "Yeah, I was angry." And she said, "Well, who are you angry at?" And of course, she knew the answer. And the answer was I was angry at everybody, but that was only half the answer. The truth was I was angry at myself.
Yeah.
Uh, for not availing myself of help when I saw things going bad, and for letting my family down and friends down and stuff like that. So then the piece of guilt and shame came in. But so a year goes by, and my little boy is born, and he's older now, and I don't want to put out too much information publicly about family directly, but he's a wonderful, wonderful, smart kid, barely a kid anymore. And then my girlfriend's two daughters and oldest son, just absolutely great, well-adjusted kids. And I mean, we all have struggles as teenagers, but they've managed so well. And I'm pretty sure most of them read the book, so they know my background, and then they can hear me doing podcasts and stuff. So, so at that point, I had to go to prison. As I said, it's all about the rules, and it's not the warden's rules. And when I consult for typically white collar criminals or white collar defendants that are headed to prison, I have to go through the culture and understand the dynamics and the rules and regulations set by prisoners, because they're very important, and there's a lot at stake, even at the lowest security, which would be a camp, which I never made it to a camp, but it applies across the board. And we're seeing white collar criminals. God, I hate that word. It's hitting my ears so oddly today. Are getting stiffer sentences than they did 10 years ago, as we know. So I get there, and I have a little bit of background from the 6 or 7 months I spent in county jail. And immediately I get the flu. I'm in transit for about 2.5 weeks, which means I'm flying all over the country. On Con Air, they call it. I think there's a movie about it. And it's just like the movie, shackled, wrists and ankles, and you're dropped off at jails. And we flew through Atlanta and stayed there. It's just, rats and, not being fed, not showering, guys going to the bathroom in their pants. I couldn't, you'll read about it. I hope. So I get the flu. I'm there for 2 weeks. I'm in the top bunk, and immediately I started seeing the violence. Didn't see as much of it. Saw a couple of fights in county jail, but in prison, there's violence, and it was, of course, I saw some violence in the Marine Corps, but this was on a different level. And
what got you through? What could have prepared you for this is nothing, but what would you say? How did you adjust? How did you get, what were the kind of mental conditioning or mental preparedness or perform? What kind of things, what kind of mind games did you have to play to get through this?
Well, one of my biggest fears was that somebody would find out that I was a prosecutor,
Right.
former
Yeah,
prosecutor.
I could imagine.
And, that could have been a death sentence for sure. Um, to join certain organizations, some people would call them gangs. I'll choose organizations. To gain entrance into them, sometimes you have to commit an act of violence. And so I was always afraid that I'd be found out and I would be the target of that. So the mental piece is enormous. The physical piece is, being ready to fight, being ready physically to fight, and knowing that it's going to happen. It's eventually going to happen. So, but the mental piece is the hardest because you don't know how far you can take a conversation with someone. You don't want to be disrespectful. And respect is the name of the game in prison. But if you're too respectful, then you're soft. It's this thing that you have to overcome in your mind. And what you'll understand about it is the acceptance piece. And it's accepting that I'm here and I have to figure this out very quickly. I have to understand the politics among the prisoners. I have to understand who's in charge of what. And then I have to find my place in that that's going to keep me safe and going to keep me sane. And finding my place was absolutely critical. Fortunately for me, one, maybe this is a psychosis, I don't know, but I'm not afraid to fight. I'm not a very good fighter, but I'm not afraid to do it. And two, I had the legal background. So, half the people in there didn't commit the crime. Half the people in there did commit the crime and admit to it, but they have appeals to do. They have habeas corpus petitions. They have Federal Bureau of Prisons complaints that they file. And then there's appeals processes. So somehow I got a job in the law library. And it had nothing to do with me being an attorney. I just went into the civilian who ran that area, and she needed somebody. And so I got the job. So then people started to find out that I had practiced law. And some of the people that needed help were the shot callers for some of the organizations I just spoke about. So the shot callers, for people who don't know, are the leaders of that particular organization within that prison.
So you got these affiliations as a result of however the inmates had kind of organized themselves, and like anywhere, leaders emerge to the top in these shot callers. I'm like envisioning you like the Shawshank Redemption attorney to the accountant there. You're like you're able to do the appeals. You've got this value.
Andy Dufresne.
Yeah,
I love that film.
Yeah, of course. You're like the Andy Dufresne of the law library there at the federal penitentiary.
It's true, and they also knew. I'm just a little bit nuts, just a hair, and that's all it took. So, and I also wasn't a mark. That was the other thing. And so when I worked with some of the guys going in, that's something that we always have to work on. But anyway, so these guys would come to me, and I mean, the shot callers are highly respected. It's
Sure.
basically like your CEO walking in and everybody stands up kind of thing. Not me. I didn't stand up because I'm not part of the organization, but something as simple as, I should back up for a second. So in prison, you have to pick your own name. It's a phenomenon. You don't have to, but nobody calls themselves by their first name, especially typically you see it among the minority community. And that goes back to, that goes back 100 years because of the way that they've been treated by the government And so picking an alias, it's harder to find out who exactly that person is. So
Right.
so um, so I didn't know what to pick. You know, everybody would call me Andrew or Drew growing up. And so that's what I went by. So one day I'm sitting around, I'm like, no, you know what? The absurdity levels, Charlie, are through the roof. It's unbelievable. And so one day I'm just sitting there staring at my wall, and you know, I've already read probably 1,000 pages that day, done 1,000 push-ups that day, walked, you know, 5 miles to the yard, and you know now, and it's only 10 in the morning, right? So I had the entire day. So I'm in the law library. I decided I need to pick my own name, and this guy comes in, and he said, "Hey, nice to meet you." Um, he said, "My name's Allah." And I thought, wow, that's a pretty big name to give yourself, you know.
Yeah.
Talk about setting the standard pretty high. And I said, "It's nice to meet you. My name's Messiah." And he just crumbled because I don't know. It's just like my name was better or something. And I just picked it. It just popped into my head. So everybody started calling me Messiah. It was the most absurd thing you've ever heard. But there was a few guys that just were friends of mine that would just refuse to do it. And it became like this joke. So anyhow, I started doing these appeals and habeas corpus petitions for some of the shot callers. And I really helped anybody, though. You
Right.
know, it was anybody who needed help. And the treatment that they would get in prison was just abhorrent. You can't imagine. And I'm not saying by among other prisoners. I'm saying by Federal Bureau of Prisons. It's awful. It's unbelievably bad. And someday we'll talk more about it. But it's so as soon as I'm helping a shot caller, no one's going to bother me. No one's going to step to me or try to rob me or try to fight me. One fight did occur, or a couple did occur, but those were from people that weren't affiliated with any organization. So, you know, I sort of unwittingly protected myself because of my knowledge of the law, and also because I wasn't a marks. But it was intense, and the mind games are incredibly intense. Like you and I could be talking, and let's say that we're not, you know, you'll have a couple of friends in prison that you confide in some stuff, but you really can't trust anybody. Like I trust you inherently for some reason, and we have only known each other a short time.
I know,
But
right?
in prison, it's just not a good idea. And so we're talking, and then it became a mind game over whether I would borrow his magazine that he gets in the mail every month. And there's a pecking order to borrowing someone's magazine. And so what I did was I traded him a piece of fruit to get moved up the list of people to the top. So I would be the first person to get the new magazine that came in the mail. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the answer obviously is if you haven't experienced it, no. But as you're describing it, it makes total. It's like there's a hierarchy, you know, a hierarchy that's been installed and a set of rules, and it's up to you to figure them out. And you know, I think it's amazing how, to me, the word that comes to mind is like hypervigilant. It's like you're always, you know, they'd use the term walking on eggshells, I guess is another way to describe it, but you're really, where do you find peace? You know, where do you where do you shut your eyes and find, you know, if I'm in a conversation, am I saying the right things? Am I asking the right questions? Did I move the right needle? Did I get the right card? Did I ask for the right cigarettes? I mean, it's like, to me, it just seems like constant hypervigilance without any peace or solitude.
Charlie, that's exactly what it is. Even when you're sleeping at night and the cell closes, you know your cellie. Okay. You know him, you get along, but how well do you know somebody? You know, how well do you know somebody? And then, but all day long, it's like that. And when I got out, we're jumping ahead, but I'll go right back. You know, everybody who knew me when I got out said, geez, you walk different, you look different. It looks like you're, you know, like you're paranoid or like you're just waiting for something to happen. And I didn't know that I went through that transformation. And it took quite a bit of time. I still flip into that mode every now and then. And, but not where people can notice it, but I feel it inside. I'm like, relax, you know, why am I, you know, I'm in the grocery store. So where did I find peace and solace? You can go to the yard, which is the exercise area, and you can be alone. There's the yard is enormous. I don't know, it's maybe 5-10 football fields all the way around, I would say, in terms of size. And that's the rec area, the rec yard. And so you could go down there. And so I would find a place, usually in the middle of one of the fields, and sit down, read, and meditate, pray. And I had gotten away from my spirituality. I was completely bankrupt in that department, but I started to meditate to a universal energy, a higher power. And I had dabbled with 12-step programs. And so I understood that there was a power greater than myself that I had ignored or not reached out to whatsoever for a long, long time. But even then, you know, you're still, you know, you're not closing your eyes to meditate for 30 minutes, you know, in a seated position. You're still very vigilant.
Did you maintain your sobriety in prison?
I did for a long time. For 3 years, I did. And then circumstances at home, particularly with my father and his health, and, you know, 50 other excuses, right? But somebody had made prison hooch, which is basically, you know, mashed up fruit, bacteria, and it grows over 3 or 4 days, but it's absolutely rocket fuel. And so I would drink that on occasion. You'd pay for it. Excuse me. But no, I didn't. I did not. I had the opportunity many times to do heroin, and I didn't. And I write about this in one chapter, about what went through my mind when I had the opportunity. You know, I was speaking with a psychologist the other day who smokes cigarettes. He still, tobacco is his thing. He loved it, and he said something like, "Tobacco is my muse." And so for me, that was heroin or OxyContin, or any opioid, really, you know, because that's the no feel, no deal drug. You know, all that insecurity, you know, fear, worry. I mean, all that stuff goes away, but we know it's just a temporary thing. It doesn't work long. But I had this opportunity, and then, but once I got through with the first opportunity, and also for the prisoners that could afford to pay me, everything's a hustle. You get paid for everything. You know, whether you run your own little store in your cell, that you sell people stuff off the commissary when they run out, you know, to cleaning, you know, there's a guy who can clean your cell for you, a guy who'll do your laundry for you, a guy who will do your legal work for you, but you're going to pay him. And legal work obviously was one of the higher paying jobs among prisoners. So there
always an overachiever, aren't you, Andrew McKenna? Always finding your way to the top there at the federal presidency. I love it. I love it.
when I talk about a mind game, Charlie, there were guys that insisted on paying me. Do you know why?
I don't.
So they wouldn't owe me anything.
Makes sense. Yeah, more
You
more
know?
more rules, more hierarchy,
It's another rule,
more
right?
more
And
code.
that's one of the. That's right. I don't owe you anything. I paid you. I don't owe. There are no debts. Don't get into debt.
So
Don't
if I
borrow anything.
so if you wrong me, I'm still gonna take care of you whether you did this or not, because all bets are we're even after I
We
pay
are
you for this
even.
legal work.
That's
Wow.
right. If it goes down, you're you and I'm me. You know, I don't have your back.
So as you
However,
go ahead.
yeah, because I'll just say this, with the CEOs, the shot callers, um, I'm no good to them if I'm banged up sitting in the hole pending investigation because I got my ass kicked. So no one's going to touch me, you know. But as time went on, that became less and less of a concern. Uh, I think it's because you adjust to the absurdism and you almost become less human in prison. I think,
You're socialized to that environment. You just you've your whole socialization, your whole interpersonal skills, they've all just adapted to this new hierarchy. You're now a prisoner and you're in so you have a role there, and so you're just socialized different and desensitized to what your life on the outside world was. And I mean, to me it sounds like very innate survival skills, and how adaptive we are to our environment. I mean, to me it's a case study in survival skills. And what I can't imagine, or I think what I'm most curious about is when you start to know that you're getting close to the end of your sentence, and you realize what your life was like before. Now you've been socialized, and you talked a little bit about how some of that stuff lingered, but you're starting to face the prospect of getting out of this socialized environment where you've got a role and a responsibility, so to speak, and cellmate. And now you're anticipating, you know entering the back to society again with a record, with the shame and guilt of the crime. I'm really interested. Did that create anxiety for you? I mean, I'm sure there's anticipation of getting out coupled with the anxiety of what you're getting out into. And I'm trying to, maybe hear from you what that push pull must have been like.
yeah, that's a great question. So as I started to get towards the end of my sentence, um, like I would think about it nonstop. Everybody who's incarcerated, it seems, cannot, who has an out date, uh, can't stop thinking about it. And uh, there is anxiety. I knew um, that I had a family to go back to. You figure out who your friends are when you go to prison. I forget whose line that is, but it's absolutely accurate. It was some actor, I think, um, who said that. Uh, but yeah, the anxiety's intense, and all you can do is try to plan, and it's that illusion of control. Um, the best laid plans are of mice and men, and you uh, try to set up jobs and connections. But I knew I was coming out changed, and changed forever, because I had experienced this culture. And what I had learned, we'll get into it, but uh, I had learned something about my mindset when I was a prosecutor, and the charging decisions I would make or urge my supervisor to approve at DOJ in Washington and Alexandria, Virginia. And I was a different person, having seen who I was in with and what they had been through as children, and adults. I mean, abject poverty and abuse, and it would blow your mind, some of the stories. So I got out, and um, I had this plan. I was going to work for an attorney who's now a Supreme Court justice in New York State. Wonderful, wonderful man. I probably shouldn't say his name. Um, no, I will. Jim Walsh is his name, and he's a Supreme Court justice in New York. And but he was a practicing attorney at the time, and he and I knew each other, you know, from law school and from practicing law together before I got in trouble. And he literally, Charlie, gave me the shirt off his back because I didn't have any suits left. I didn't have any shirts left, and he was a large man, but was able to fit me, you know, with some minor alterations. So I set up the job. I worked with him, and you know, got back in with my family. My son was 4 at that point, and I just reintegrated slowly, and I went to a halfway house, which is mandatory halfway house time. But a halfway house is really the same. You know, it's supposed to prepare you to be free, and they try, I think, but still, you're there with everybody who just got out of prison and who still has that high level of vigilance. And I didn't realize how high that level was until I almost got in a fight, my fault, at a 7-Eleven. And I went in, and this guy, I looked around me, just like I would if I was in line in prison for something. And you stand in line for everything, including toilet paper. So this guy was looking at me. I looked at him, and I could kind of see him in my periphery still looking at me. And this flight or fight instinct rose up in me out of control, where I looked back at him and I said, "What the fuck are you staring at?" And he looked away.
Mm. Yeah, it's you know, I think it's powerful. It's important, you know, the reflection of the character change and how innate it became, and you can see the new version of you. You know, I think this is really actually very important. The new version of you has such remorse for and acknowledgement of, you know, a man who just, you know, your prison mentality took over, and you know, you can see the remorse you have. I mean, it's just it's all over your face.
Yeah. So the guy looks at me, and he's probably somebody's dad. Charlie, he's
Right.
got half a gallon of milk in his hand. You know, he's wearing an LL Bean flannel shirt, you know, and he probably golfed that day or something like that. And maybe he just like, I looked familiar to him or something. I'm thinking, oh my God, I left. I paid for my stuff. I left, got in the car, and I said to Dawn, my girlfriend, I said, "You can't believe what just happened." And I told her, and she said, "Well, what I can't believe is the way that you walk." I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "You walk as if you're going to go hurt somebody." And I said, "No, I don't." And she said, "Yeah, it's different. I can see it." And we joke about it today, you know, all these years later. But then when we got home, I said, "Show me that walk." And she showed me. And I was like, "I do not walk like that." So all these changes, getting out was difficult, but I had a loving family waiting for me. It was the best feeling in the world.
Well, I'll
And I
tell
had a
you,
lot of
I
support.
think a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast on digital platforms will want to shoot over to YouTube to see your face when you talk about your family, because it's one thing to talk about the judge that hired you and gave you the shirt off his back, but I can tell you that the corners of your mouth turned up not insignificantly when you talked about, you know, your family and your son, and being able to reconnect with them, man. It's really powerful, really
It was
powerful.
magical. And I think about these guys that, you know, doing 10, 15, 20, 25 years, you know, on marijuana charges or cocaine charges with no violence, no guns, and, you know, getting hit with RICO statutes and conspiracy statutes. You know, I deserved every day that I got for what I did. Uh, but these guys did a lot.
You know, when you talk about the attorney, the now Justice Walsh, who gave you literally the shirt off his back. I mean, I think it's important as people overcome adversity in their lives and they've fallen into a hole that feels insurmountable to get out of, that we acknowledge that people really do. When you take those steps to change, people do want to help. There are helping hands out there. It's imperative. I think everybody that for sure everybody that's overcome Out Loud has mentioned the importance of asking for help, and even when they didn't overtly ask for help, the availability of help, that there are, you know, when you're ready to kind of take that ego and put it down and have that humility, that there is a number of people that are willing to kind of put their arm around you, literally and figuratively, and say, okay, you know, I'm gonna strap up with you, and I'm gonna ride with you, and I'm gonna, if you want to change, I'm gonna be there with you, man. And that's really important. And I'm sure it didn't take much, just that one person believing in you, you know, to start you on a trajectory of feeling good about yourself.
Man, you hit it right on the head, Charlie. I mean, that's exactly it. Because you get out and your self-esteem's low.
Yeah.
And, you know, in that piece of their help being out, that there's help there, and to ask for it. And when I speak, and I know you do the same thing, I urge people, please, please, please ask for help. You can do it anonymously. You know, like I worked with this one guy. Yeah, he was a trader on Wall Street, almost hit rock bottom, didn't have to hit rock bottom. And he said, thank God I asked for help, because there's so much stigma still, especially in, I mean, it's everywhere in any job, with your coworkers or your bosses, but, you know, doctors and professionals, it's even, I find it to be even higher. And if you don't ask for help, you're, man, because as you said, the help is there and you can be quiet about it. And that's what we do as humans. You know, all the jobs that I've had in my life don't even come close to the feeling of helping somebody. And I'm not perfect at it. And you know, I'm not saying it in that way. It's just that anybody knows that. Even when I talk to my son, who's 15, we talk about that. You know, like, what really brings you joy in life? You know, like, I'll see him help his friends, or his friends will help him with something. And I'll say, well, how did that feel? It felt great. That's our human connection. That's all we have. Otherwise, we're just these robots walking around, you know, feeling alone.
Yeah, you really are. And thank you for that. That's to me, that's the important element to when you can flip this on its head, because what you're really doing is by asking for help and allowing somebody to help you, you're giving someone a gift. I mean, I forever, you know, will take these opportunities for people to help me, and I want to push it away. And you know, I've got this somehow, meaning I'm strong enough, and really not only don't I need to be strong enough, I'm denying another human being the opportunity to feel something wonderful. You know, how wonderful it feels for me, how wonderful it feels for you. And really, by asking for help and allowing another person to come into our lives, we're giving them a gift and allowing them to feel good. And that really, when you think about it, is the whole thing. Because now you take the emphasis off of you and what you can get, and you give that away, and asking for help really starts to be a lot easier.
Right. And in line with that, I believe in the butterfly effect. And, you know, you're right. You have to give. You can't steal somebody's opportunity to do something nice for someone else, you know, because now you're getting in the way of their journey. You're getting in the way of their happiness. And no matter what, when you do that, it's bringing people together. I had one of my best friends is Kenny Robinson. He and I met in prison. He started Freedom Fighting Missionaries, which is a 501c3. Unbelievable, but it's all about helping the formerly incarcerated. He's out of Charlotte, and I do some work with him in New York City for Freedom Fighting Missionaries. And he, black guy, clearly I'm a white guy, and in prison races are separated. almost 98% of the time. Well, he and I somehow bucked the system and became really good friends and would walk the yard for hours and hours. He and I got out of prison right around the same time. He was doing 10 years for one bank robbery, which frankly, I don't even believe he was guilty. And he had a hung jury, so mistrial, and then they retried him. So he got 10 years, and I got 5.5 for 6 robberies. So anyhow, we kept in touch. He was one of the handful of people that I've kept in touch with since prison. I made some of the best friends in my life in prison.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. I just saw one, Ronnie Farmer. Whoops, sorry, Ronnie. He doesn't care. He came to New York City and visited me with his wife. We had a wonderful time. Gaetano Milano, incredible story. But Kenny and I really had almost a brotherly connection. The good brother, not the bad brother. You know, we all have a good brother and a bad. But anyhow, he and I stayed in touch, and we encouraged each other when we first got out. And if he was feeling down, you know, we would talk about what do we want to do? You know, we have to make a living. But what do we really want to do? And he talked about success stories. I strongly recommend you consider having him on as a guest. And we supported each other for years and years and years. And so he starts this nonprofit, and it's all about helping. And the attention he has gotten, he will walk through, you know, he can't get an appointment with the CEO of the local hospital, you know, to deliver COVID vaccinations to rural areas, right? So he will be persistent. He'll call 100 times and he'll get that. He's that kind of guy. And, you know, brilliant beyond compare, but hardworking and caring. I love that piece. It's so human, you know, it's just, it warms my heart. It sounds corny, but at 52 years old, I've seen a lot of bad in this world.
There's a lot of good, and there's a lot of good.
There's a lot of good.
Andrew,
way more good than bad.
What would you say the top couple of things? Because clearly, you know, I know you say you came out of prison changed. I know some of the things were kind of the societal adjustments you had to make, but I think you learned a lot about yourself, and you came out changed, not just in the societal kind of prison norm way that you had to overcome, but it looks like you learned a lot about yourself. And what would you say were the few things that you learned about yourself as you got out of prison and reflect back on the time that you were there?
Well, one thing, and I thought this after officer candidate school for the Marine Corps, 10 weeks in Quantico, that I could get through anything. Well, that pales in comparison. So I got out of prison. I thought, if I made it through that, I can get through anything. What I learned about myself, though, fundamentally, is that I was too self-centered. I put too much focus on myself and not others, including my family primarily. And that I could never do that again. You know, I could never put people second. You know, I mean, you have to take care of yourself first, especially when it comes to health and addiction and mental health, because you're really, with other people's help, you have to get there. But that I was selfish. That's what I came to believe, you know, that I was selfish. But here's the bright lining of it, is that through practice, I can change that. You know, that's the piece, that's the hope piece that, you know, all right, so let's say you're a con artist. You know, you don't always have to be a con artist. And let's say you're a drug dealer. You don't always have to be a drug dealer. You're self-centered and selfish. You don't always have to be that one. We can make these changes inside of ourselves. And that's what I did. You know, that's it, just creeping along and catching myself. You know, you identify what's valuable, what, you know, my value system. I literally wrote it down. as just before I got out of prison. I said, all right, these are the things that are important to me. Right now, I'm in this situation where I have to survive. So this is what I have. Here's the action that I have to take to survive. And I mean, like, stay alive, survive, right? Or not kill myself, because there was a time in prison that I came very close to killing myself. So I guess the resilience piece is what I learned. And through practice, anybody can change, you know. And I learned other things, you know. I learned that I can tolerate much more than I thought I could. You know, when we talk about dialectical behavior therapy and just distress tolerance and mindfulness and that kind of thing. So apparently I can put up with way more stressful situations than I ever thought I could. And it did. It changed me and it strengthened me. But most importantly, Charlie, it showed me that we have a lot of work to do in terms of equity. I should say equality, I guess, would be a more exact term within our criminal justice system. And a lot has to be done, but it can be done.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, just as sitting and kind of having a front row seat for this story and hearing that piece right there, I mean, it's life changing, because I think, you know, I will say we pay too much privilege to the past. I mean, we are where we are because of what we did, and we're gonna be where we're going because of what we do next. And if what we do next is different, who we become can be different. And that's, you know, I think that's what gives, you know, for me, that gives people so much hope, because, you know, is it going to be easy? Probably not. You know, is it going to be quick? Probably not. Can it be done? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And
That's right.
and and done better and done quicker and done easier if you go with someone who's been, and you're obviously reaching out your hand now to so many and helping in so many ways. And this story of redemption, you know, to me is why I started this. It's why I do this. And really what I'd love to hear now is a little bit about what you're doing now. You know, how you've got, I will tell you that throughout this podcast, and I really do encourage people to watch this on YouTube for one reason only, which is to watch literally the expression, your lightness. I mean, as you've gotten out of prison, your whole demeanor, the number of smiles I see, the little chuckles I see, I mean, it's lighter. I mean, you feel like the life you're living today, you're truly, you know, this double life that we talked about before is gone. The stress, the anxiety of it is off of your shoulders, it's off of your chest, it's off of your face. You know, you present and are, you know, one human being who's been through so much, and now using that, you know, in such an amazing way. I feel privileged to have gotten to know you. And so yeah, let's hear what are your, what, I know you're speaking now, and you're reaching out and helping inmates and helping attorneys and judges. I mean, give us and obviously the book, Sheer Madness, which I encourage everybody to get a copy of. It'll be up on the Overcome Out Loud website as well for you to access. But yeah, give us the end here.
What I'm doing, sure. And first of all, the privilege is mine, Charlie. Thank you for having me on. And, you know, Overcome Out Loud is an amazing podcast, and you're helping so many people, not by having, you know, knuckleheads like me on, but just by celebrating the redemption piece and giving people hope. So with that, so what I'm doing is I have a couple different things. I consult with attorneys and their clients and their clients' families. It's probably the most important piece in that.
Yeah, right.
That are facing incarceration, because when somebody goes away, their whole family has to deal with that. And so I put together a good team of people to consult and also work with their judges and work with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, because it can be a mess. It can be a real mess, and there's ways that There's things that attorneys don't know necessarily, and they wouldn't normally have to know about where their client is going when they leave the courtroom or what's happening to them. Typically, that representation ends following sentencing. So that's very fulfilling. And the phone rings at all hours of the night, but that's okay. You know, that's okay. I don't need a lot of sleep, and you know, I have team members that will take calls. So that's really fulfilling, and it's necessary, especially the piece with educating judges on what it means. You know, when you talk about the commander in chief, their biggest responsibility is making the decision to send somebody into combat, right? That's something that every president has talked about. That's what keeps them up at night, risking their lives. Well, you know, if judges sometimes might lose sight of that, or maybe it is part of what they think about, but they're sending somebody off into a world that's very confusing and run by people. Some are very well intentioned, but that's you know, we have 2.3, 2.4 million people in our prison system, so it's a huge bureaucracy. That's satisfying, working with families. The other thing that I do is I work with Kenny Robinson with Freedom Fighting Missionaries, which he says that I helped him find it, you know, like co-founder, but I'm not. That's Kenny's project, and I'll take direction from him any day on any matter related to certainly any matter at all, but really related to helping the formerly incarcerated. Because that leap from incarceration to the real world, if you don't have a law degree and you didn't grow up with some of the privileges that I grew up with, then you know, there's no question why the recidivism rate in the federal system 65%, states 45%. We're just, you know, it's a revolving door for a reason. So that's very fulfilling. Getting people back on their feet, helping them learn a trade, because they're not taught a trade in Federal Bureau of Prisons. I don't care what FBOP says on paper, they're simply not. And I've witnessed it at 2 different facilities. So that's very fulfilling. But really, the other thing that I like is I love to write, and so Dawn, my partner, can tell when I'm in a grumpy mood, because she can tell that I didn't start my day off by writing a little bit. And even if it's just a paragraph or a chapter, she can tell. She'd say, "Have you written yet today?" And back when I was going to a lot of self-help meetings prior to COVID, it was the same thing. "Have you been to a meeting lately?" And she could just tell the difference in me. And
Yeah,
I think you know what I'm talking about.
I sure do.
Yeah.
We need that relief. We constantly need that connection and that relief. And I don't know, you may know better than me academically or psychologically what that pen to paper does, but I'm back into a journaling practice now. I filled 3 or 4 journals, over the course of my life. And I got back to just kind of journaling recently, and it's just so therapeutic. I mean, it's just so cleansing to just get some stuff out of here and down there. And, I make sure I'm intentional with my gratitude list, and I make sure I'm intentional in writing down, my affirmations. And, I guess I'll say it like this, at least for me, and you can probably describe it being a lifelong writer yourself. It's like trying to cut a new path, hiking trail out here in California. People hike a lot. There's beautiful trails. I don't remember doing that in Maine, but that's probably because I was busy doing other shit. So I'm sure they hike in Maine, but here you have these beautiful hiking trails, which are kind of like I think about the old way I used to think. And, in order to think a new way, I need to clear all this brush, this barranca, these branches, this overgrown brush, and if I just do it for a few days, the path isn't that clear. And if I do it for a long time, the new path I want gets a little clearer. But if I stop, it overgrows again. I end up down the old path again. And so it really is, I guess maybe it's neuroplasticity at its basic scientific level, but you've really got to stay clearing that brush. You've got to stay clearing that new path and keep it clean and headed where you want to head, or kind of feeling those old thoughts and thinking those old thoughts comes back pretty fast. And I like the new path better. I don't know about you, but I like the new path a lot better.
Man, I am just at awe at your analogy, Charlie. Clearing the brush. That's exactly right. It's a perfect way to put it. And yeah, I love the new way. I love the new way, and it's waking up. And you ask what I do. One of the practices before I go to sleep is I kind of do a little inventory. And some people might call it a 10th step, but I know this show isn't about necessarily self-help programs, but looking back over my day and not overthinking it. That's what I used to do. I used to, analyze certain conversations that I had with people and, overanalyze it, overthink it. But now it's just kind of, taking an inventory of how my day was. Did I treat somebody poorly? Did I not call a person I promised to call? These things. And, when necessary, cleaning that up the next day. The journaling piece, I'm with you. I recommend that to everybody that I speak with, whether they're struggling or not. Maybe life is grand,
you don't have to be,
is.
you don't have to be sick to get better. You can just keep getting better.
Yeah, you can keep getting better. And people will say, well, I've tried journaling, but I sit down and I don't know what to write. Then sit down and write, I don't know what to write, I remember my psychologist years ago, I just wasn't writing. I was procrastinating. This is actually prior to the robberies. And she said, well, at the end of the session, she said, well, I understand, the whole session, she said, I understand, and it's tough to do that. And you have to give yourself permission to take time off from that. But she said, well, that's sort of the end of the session. She said, but one thing, writers write. And so she wasn't letting me off the hook. And I'm not going to let myself off that hook. But yeah, the new way is so much better. And people who are listening or whatever, I mean, you can get through what you're going through. As bad as it might seem, as bad as it actually is, you can get through what you're going through. It's going to take help sometimes, but don't be ashamed of that. That shame or fear that you're feeling isn't real. It isn't real. And you can get through your difficult time. I promise.
Yeah, well, and that I think is an incredible place to end, for especially coming from you. What a hopeful end to this episode, and what a hopeful message, and really, way to make your setback a comeback, your mess a miracle, and now using it to help so many others. And so, is there a way, we will have all the details of your contact, but if you could just share how people could connect with you, where they can find you. I know, people are going to be interested in this story. And by the way, after this, we'll definitely exchange some emails. If there's some of the guys that could make an impact and have some great overcome stories, man, let's definitely get a guest list lined up and get some of those guys on here, because it'd be great to continue to expand our reach, our message. And, we're definitely open to that as well. So thank you. So how can people find you?
Well, you're making a huge impact, you and your team, Charlie. So I will definitely send you some people I think should be on your show. People can contact me. Probably the easiest way is my email, and it's Andrew McKenna, and then the letters ACS@gmail.com. So it's Andrew, ANDREW, MCKENNA, ACS@gmail.com.
Terrific. And we'll, like I said, we'll have a link up for the book. And
Great.
do you have any social media? You doing any, are you on Twitter, or can people find you on Instagram at all?
They can find me on Instagram. Andrew James McKenna is my handle, or whatever they call it. Pretty
That's
easy.
right. Handle. Is that your real name, or is that your nickname?
That's my real name.
We're not going Messiah. You didn't go Messiah. Oh man.
I had to outdo that guy. I don't know what it was. I had to. I mean, you know,
Ego's hard to crack, man. I just have to say, and I don't think it's obviously the last conversation you and I will have in our attempts to continue to help people. And I just, from really the bottom of my heart, thank you, Andrew. And it's remarkable to strike this relationship with you, man.
Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate you, brother.
Right on.